Hi folks, this is Thrive 2030 brought to you by Growth Curve, and my guest today is Matthew Lourey, who is the chairman of Alitium, which is a market entry and compliance support business in Vietnam. How are you today, Matthew?
Very good, thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, lovely to meet you again and have this opportunity to have you share some insights into Vietnam. It is a hot place, isn't it? It's one of the most exciting nations amongst the Southeast Asia ASEAN group, I think, because you know, you've got 7% growth, you have got a youthful population, 50% of the population under 35. It must be one and only in the world. I don't know if there's anyone else who's got that profile. You're an emerging nation with a massive demand of, consumer demand for products and services, which make it very attractive as a foreign direct investment location. And it's also quite friendly towards foreign direct investors. I understand, with low corporate tax and so forth. So I'd love to get your insights into opportunities in Vietnam today. But before we do that, would you just share with folks a little bit about your journey? I know you're Australian, you're a chartered accountant, started with the big six firms, and then broke away, and you've had a couple of your own advisory firms in that time. But the most important thing is you've been in Vietnam 20 years, and people like to know why. Why would you go away and stay away 20 years? So why Vietnam?
Well, I appreciate the intro because it sort of leads into the why Vietnam is that I didn't come here for 20 years. I came here for 6 months as a break. And as you said, I'm my chartered accountant. I'd worked in Big Six and Big Four as it moved. And then I worked in funds management, investment capital raisings. And I took a break for 6 months to come to Vietnam, and that just extended. And eventually my job in Australia, they said, well, we'll actually find someone else. We're not going to keep it open. You're enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
And it took me a few years to realize that I wasn't just enjoying myself. I was actually achieving something. It was rewarding.
Right.
It was very challenging because as much as it's attractive foreign investment, we can talk about that and how that works. It's not for everyone. And it's either all the differences push back against you and they frustrate you, or you get involved and you really see the successes. Mm-hmm. And for some people that works. And so for me, what kept me here in that time was that personal enjoyment of the successes, that finding solutions to something that didn't look like a solution and watching other successes and helping them along the way. So what I do now is all foreign investors. It's about doing things right. It's about understanding the market and understanding the nuances and not making the mistakes that others can make. So the journey was not a deliberate journey. It was a journey that occurred in pieces until I stopped and reflected. And that's what I created my own businesses. So just sort of to finish that story, I had one business which I grew to 150 professional staff in country across 3 cities, providing the support to foreign investors. I sold that. This business now is relatively new. It's smaller. It has a law license. It does the structural advice and the practical advice, and it handholds people who do not know anything about a market but need to. They want their Vietnam. It's exciting, or that they understand but they want to go down a particular path and want to do it properly. So we make sure we go through that process. And my experience over 20 years is what makes that. It's what I've learned, all the lessons that anyone makes in any market, but not from a Vietnamese perspective. It's from that foreign perspective. It's that common law background. It's that governance, and it's those morals and principles, bringing all of that together to make it work. And it's discussed. I was in the Australian Chamber of Commerce of Vietnam board. I was a president and director, understanding business market entry and trying to lead that discussion in the best way possible because I enjoy it. I see successes, and Vietnam is a great destination for many companies. It works for many, not for everyone, but it works for many.
Yes. So what is driving this 7% growth? Obviously, we're an emerging nation, and you've got this very youthful population, and you've got this middle class, that's creating consumer demand. But there's got to be more about the attraction in Vietnam for foreign investors. What do you think are the top 3 things that attract them to Vietnam?
Well, before we do the top 3 things, the story that creates that opportunity is that you had a very low base. You had the 75 coming out of the war into the early 80s. It was a pariah state. Late 80s, there was an opening up in the Doi Moi, the reinvigoration. That was a really low base. And the authorities said, we're going to use foreign investment. We're going to use that as the backbone. So Vietnam has developed and taken a very open approach, a liberal approach to foreign investment, because that's going to drive growth. And it has. So to the extent that Vietnam, 25% of the economy is foreign invested, but 73% of exports are from the foreign invested sector. That's the backbone. It has free trade agreements with the EU, with the UK, with ASEAN, Australia, it's TPP. It's just said, that's it. That's our lot. That's what we're going to do. And we have to keep modernising and keep changing. So with that, opportunity arises, and the very low cost base, and it's progressing, and it's growing dramatically, has allowed the growth to occur. So within that, foreign investors have an opportunity to invest in Vietnam with a fair bit of certainty. Vietnam is it's linked and aligned with foreign investment, but has to protect it, because the economy is it's a circular economy, that the foreign investments create domestic growth. But if you don't protect the foreign investors, you will damage that domestic growth. So that foreign investors are protected. So opportunities with a bit more certainty. You don't get the certain political spheres and countries, and Vietnam's been very careful to protect that image and that constant growth. If you break the cycle, things won't work the same way. It is that because it's a maturing economy, you've gone from being a low-value manufacturing to a much more high-tech, high-value add in the manufacturing space, but to a domestic consumption economy where you've got opportunities, and particularly from a Australian, New Zealand perspective, the services side becomes very attractive, because putting those back into market. So anything services related is very much happening. And Vietnam's a great test bed because it has 100 million people, but it also opened to foreign investment. It means that you can test it. You can use it as an expansion market with a lower risk or a lower capital cost for coming into market than you may have for other markets. Indonesia's huge, great potential market on the doorsteps, in the Asian, but it's really complicated and expensive to get in, where Vietnam says, hang on, we actually give you an opportunity. So I'd say they're the three factors, just sort of very broad sense I'd look at as why and that exists at the moment, particularly and I look from a foreign perspective looking inbound, which is what I generally do. But I think they're part of the drivers and why we're seeing that growth, and why that growth will continue, with the ups and downs for the near future at least. And it's one more thing, Vietnam government has put out recently some position papers and some directives from the top, so they don't fall in the middle income trap. So they don't to drop off. They're going to keep pushing the growth to make sure that Vietnam doesn't fall into those traps of other countries, which is why it still remains attractive to foreign investors and foreign to be involved, because they're very acutely aware those traps may exist if they don't address them now.
So you mentioned a modernising economy. What does that look like for people coming in?
You're looking at it's really interesting that it's still a rural dominated as far as population basis society. So if we've got large numbers have been moving to the cities, they're moving to industrial areas, eventually into the cities. Ho Chi Minh City, contiguous urban populations around about 14 million people. So you've got large urban areas that are growing. And so in the centre of Ho Chi Minh City, where I am, centre of Saigon, office buildings, cars and everything else, it's no different to any other developed city in that the infrastructure and needs and the people and how they spend. If you go out of that, you're starting to see how that changes into the suburban, urban areas, and then into the countryside. So the big cities, the average incomes, the disposable income and expectations, it's driving the rest of the country. So it's like it's growing out as you see this, the modernisation in the major cities. But you've also got Vietnam. It doesn't have restrictions from the internet like some other, it's a socialist country, but it doesn't have that. It just says foreign cultures. It doesn't have the restrictions for travel. It doesn't have restrictions. So it's just said, society, we're happy to let you have those freedoms. We're having foreign investors come in, and it's like a melting pot. And that means that you are getting to most extent, there's good and bad. I'm talking a lot of positives, but this is what drives the growth, is that you have this curiosity from the local population. You have this desire to work with the foreign investors because that's where the growth was coming from. You've got the desire to learn mixed in that, and all of those together with actual GDP growth, compound growth that no other country in Asia has. If you look in the last 30 years, that ratio of growth is just, it's in the thousands of percent from where it was to how it's gone that period in a cumulative basis. It's significant. And with that, that back to the question, it modernizes. And there's a long way to go. In the countryside, it's very, very low development. In the major cities, Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, Da Nang, it's a big city. It's a big urban city, and it's got all the infrastructure that you expect in a city and expectations of the people living in those large cities.
So it's kind of like offering two different opportunities. One is for those who might be servicing people in the cities who already have done the development, and then with such a large population that's still in the country, the urbanization has still yet to occur. So that presents another opportunity, doesn't it, for infrastructure development and the establishment of, as you say, taking the development outside of the cities and bringing some of those people in. So I guess that's one opportunity. Historically, distribution was an issue because you couldn't get to everyone. Now, your distribution channels are, okay, I segment it if I'm distributing something, and I can focus on the big cities. I can focus on where the population and wealth concentrations are without trying to necessarily reach all 100 million people because there's fragmentation in the countryside. Yet, the infrastructure, as you say, opportunities from an infrastructure perspective is opportunities on modernising farming techniques, and so for agricultural support and moving into larger scale agricultural processes and the manufacturing that leads from that. So you can take it from either angle, and it's an interesting path where Vietnam has grown on the back of manufacturing. Manufacturing's not going to be the be all and end all forever for Vietnam, and they know that. So high tech, agricultural development, high-tech manufacturing, and services as the population matures are all areas that are changing. Low-value manufacturing, Vietnam doesn't work that well anymore. If you want to make the cheapest socks, if you want to make a sock company, Bangladesh, Cambodia, there's a lot of cheaper places. If you want to do something well, Vietnam is, and do something which requires educated workforce and a high-tech investment into that for automation and the future. Vietnam, that's where it presents itself now. It's trying to find its niche in the world, and that works. When you say high tech, which you talked about a couple of times just now, what type of high tech, when you're referring to that, are you talking about technology, or are you talking about high tech in manufacturing or high tech in the services sector? What are you referring to?
But all of the above, and that's been a deliberate focus. So I used to do MBA presentations to visiting executive MBA groups, and I put up on the board, on the screen, the government's desire to move to a high tech from a low value add to a high tech, and I would laugh back 15 years ago and say, look, best wishes. Intel came in. So Intel's largest chip making plant in the world is still in Vietnam, and the lowest reject rate. Now, it doesn't do all the first stage development. It does the core production, but it's there. Apple has moved almost everything other than iPhones to Vietnam. So your MacBooks, your iPads, your AirPods, but that's only been in recent years. So that transition has been recent years. 50% of your Samsung phones come out of Vietnam. Your movement to a high-tech product, and the chips and the boards and the finished products and your Google Pixels come out of here and all of that stuff. That's a recent transition, and that's what government pushed. And I laughed at, it's happening. That's what that transition. But also, if you're going into certain industrial parks, particularly those closer to the to the city areas, unless your production facilities shows that it's using technology, it's using automation, it's using high-tech equipment, it's trying to take that value add to a greater level, you may not get approval in that location. They may say, actually, we're reserving this for both environmentally friendly and taking this production to the next level. We don't want to bring more people from the countryside into the cities just for the sake of a workforce. We want to actually make this a long-term sustainable high-tech, so that the process is high-tech, the products a high-tech, no, not solely. Vietnam still relies on garments and furniture, etc., and footwear, but that's where we're moving to. And in society, digitisation is been really important. So the Australian government's just had a smart cities delegation through, for example, trying to assist, and all the government bodies in Vietnam are happy to support those delegations because they're moving digitisation. So that some payments, cash, we've decashed in the last 18 months, where the little street vendors and the street carts, they use scan QR code. They don't want your cash. They want Q. So that movement, but also digital IDs. So you can use digital IDs for many things now. On my car, if I've got my freeway toll pass, is also the same that they use for parking on the street, and the same at the airport to come in and out of the car parking. They used one system that's digitised and linked in it's the government system of trying to remove the barriers to life using digitisation. And there's obviously pushback, but that's very much a push about how to make things better using a digital approach, but without necessarily, to a certain extent, compromising on the China score credits, etc. That's not the main design. Maybe some of that in the background, but that making people's lives better across the board. So yeah, it is a full spectrum from that end manufactured product to how things are made to how society works.
So this is the contrasts are big, aren't they? From all this digitization and high tech in the city to the very extensive rural and low tech parts of Vietnam. So for foreign investors who are thinking about coming in, I mean, one of the things I suppose that they would need to consider is how do they play in the high-tech space and the modern city area, because they won't be the first. There'll be other providers there from all around the world. So therefore, what they bring in terms of their offer would need to be extremely competitive. However, if they're looking at the agricultural sector, as you made that point about bringing in agricultural tech to improve mass production and so forth, that might be a very different offer, mightn't it?
And it's where you start. So if a third of all businesses start in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon as it's still commonly referred.
Yes.
And that is because it's the most straightforward. You can set up, you can do things easier. And that's the most common path. And particularly for foreign businesses, actually probably 70% go through Ho Chi Minh City as a starting point because that's your entry point. But that's not for everyone. So if you're looking at an agricultural project, you may spend time in the Mekong Delta talking to different provinces, and the provincial, state equivalent government authorities are very supportive. And so you end up working through the authorities and getting support because it's a provincial-based registration process for your company and where you start. You're not trapped in that province, but you generally want to be located where you're obviously starting to work and putting your first efforts. So if you're trying to do a agricultural modernisation, a technology-focused manufacturing, cleaning, whatever facility that is, you'd be working within that province. And the support from the provincial authorities is actually fairly significant, particularly as you move out of the cities. And they want investment. They want to encourage development and advancement. Therefore, they're supportive to help. So you can't just, you've got to understand where you want to do things and where the projects, where the opportunities are before you pay money and start something. You've got to make sure you're doing it in the right location. And with 100 million people, it's not a big country land area, but it is very fragmented. You get it wrong, you may completely be off the ball about what you can do and can't do, unfortunately. Yes.
Well, not only does it offer these two different perspectives, because you've got the city life and then that vast country life, and you're right about the Mekong Delta being a great place for agricultural people to come looking for opportunity. But you've also got the difference between the north and the south and how they do different approaches to business, one being a government centre, one being a commercial centre. Can you describe how you should approach those two very different environments?
And let's start from a people point of view. So northern culture and southern culture differ in Vietnam, and it's one predominant ethnic group. But language nuances change significantly. So words and pronunciation can be different north and south. Not to a great extent that people can't understand themselves, but there's people instantly can know and feel where you're from, and that changes it. So in the north, you've got to become like family. The time and effort and the relationship development in the north, and based out of Hanoi, to get somewhere. You do deals in coffee shops over many months and many weeks, and you'll see people with business cards with two different things on the back and the front and different things because they're wearing different hats, trying to create deals. But that relationship development. And in the south, it's very much transactional. So it's more of right price, right person, transaction. And they'll work with you again, great, but it comes down to the transaction. And the people that are involved, and it interestingly is very hard for a southerner to be sent to the north. So if I've got a team and a project in Hanoi, I want it led from someone from the north who adapts to that culture because they can tell the difference. And culturally, as a foreigner, I get more of a free pass. I can adapt. I get, the faux pas that I can do culturally are not that important. They'll forgive me in the north and the south, and I can be nice and just generally relationship focused in both places. But this Vietnamese staff, they struggle going from south to north. North to south is more acceptable. And so the regional differences comes into your play of you need to pick where you want to start. You need to base yourself in a location, and then you can expand. And it's not one homogeneous country when it comes to how you market. So I looked at one of the marketing companies about, I was looking at the market research about how they deal with cleaning goods, household cleaning, it was dishwashing liquid, and they looked at what the decision-making process and brand, value for money, quantity and size. The way the northerner looked at it and the southerner was completely different. You needed a completely different marketing strategy for the exact same product in the different place, north and south. So getting that, picking one. Now, most do Ho Chi Minh City because of the commercial headquarters. Hanoi is very government focused, very much like a very large Canberra, but it still has a large commercial hub and it has wealth. When Rolls-Royce opened their first showroom in Vietnam, it was opened in Hanoi. Ho Chi Minh City is significantly bigger. Hanoi, so it has there's pros and cons. So once you've got that worked out, if you need to be a regulated business, you're doing maybe telecoms, you're maybe doing banking, Hanoi near the regulators may work out. If it's just the commercial and the certain consumer side, maybe where the volume of people is. And that's not a given that's the answer. Now, most people Ho Chi Minh City, but I would never advise someone that that's the right answer. It does depend. Occasionally, Da Nang, which is the third biggest city, rarely, though, as the first port of call. It's generally Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi, unless you're in agriculture, and then you want to find out that agricultural locations across the country. It may not be Mekong, but to find and explore. But just to keep in mind, you've got 2/3 of the population lives south of the centre, so population does concentrate in the south. And agriculturally, the south is more fertile, particularly in the Mekong, than the centre and the north. So that's why Ho Chi Minh City tends to be the first entry point, but it's not explicitly the right one, because once you start, you've got to put your effort in that area first and then expand out of it, because the north-south differences, it does make a difference. And the centre does have subtle differences as well, but they're not as material than the north-south differences.
The youthful population, 50% of the population under 35, that's a phenomenal demographic number, but what it does is it creates huge intrigue in terms of what does that say about the country, its culture, what people are wanting, what it offers in terms of resources, and how to serve that market, because obviously they're very high tech. They're obviously all very enabled digitally and comfortable with using technology and so forth, which probably gives you an advantage. So how can people tap into that, and what is the opportunity?
Yeah, and so I see that data many times. I've got the personal opinion now that's probably 50% under 40. I think that's moved. So there is concern with the government, by the way, that the population growth at birth rate is not going to keep up. So we've got this perfect hump right now that we may not have, the tail may tail off, and so birth rates are not quite where they need to be. So in this perfect period you've got this major population, this energized, this population that is not constrained by historical norms. So just to give you idea. So historically, Vietnamese children would live in generational houses. There'd be grandparents, parents. When you get married, the wife usually moves in with the husband into the husband's house and becomes part of that household. And there's a generational house. And if you need be, build an extra floor on top for the next generation. And that was traditionally. With the modernization, as we said before, of the cities, you've got apartments everywhere. And so that generation, that 30-something young couple moving into an apartment by themselves and not taking the generational house has changed completely their spending habits, their debt positioning. They'll take debt. When you live in a generational house, you didn't have a mortgage, you didn't have debt, you just lived within your means. Now you've got debt. So you've got growth from using debt, mortgages and credit cards. You've got higher wealth. They're working for foreign companies. They've got income. So they spend, they're consumers, their e-commerce has boomed in Vietnam. That change in demographics from that, and that's not the whole country, but there's significant amount of population that's changed. So younger generation, they're more connected. I saw, it was about 5 years ago now, I saw the data that there was 100 million people, there was 140 million mobile phone subscriptions. So everyone's got 1.5 phones and phone lines. I suspect that's more now. Everyone's connected. Wi-Fi is free everywhere. You don't have to sign in and pay. Wi-Fi is just ubiquitous, has been since here, so it's not as protected as other places as a provider. It's very cheap, therefore it's just ubiquitous. Everyone connects for free anywhere you go. So digitally connected, very much connected, and also younger generation, predominantly out of university. English is part of the curriculum. Out of high school, they've 95% have a second language. English is almost exclusively it. And they're about to change schooling where English will be part of your schooling, not just a second language, actually partly done in English. So you've got educated, you've got people who are comfortable using a second language in their daily lives and being integrated as part of the world. So you've got very much connected, aware, spending consumers that aren't constrained by the historic family traditions, which had for generations has been the norm. And it does present opportunities of how do I get access to that wealth, their spending pattern? How do I employ those people? How do I reach them with an e-commerce platform? How do I information? How do I attract them? How do I market them? How they, the TikTok generation, how do I make sure that I'm part of that? And the platforms they're using here are predominantly the same platforms they're using in Australia and they're using other countries. It's not, you don't have, for the most extent, insulated platforms like China, where you've got different platforms for the domestic market. Vietnam's part of the global process. So if you want to start a YouTube channel, go for it. And what language are you doing that? And there, it's an interesting of how you attract, how you find, and how you take advantage of. And then one more thing is it's interested from a, you're looking at gender, where male and female, how they work differently. I've got a problem in a professional services offices always have, where it's predominantly female. We struggle to get males in that professional cycle. And so I've got some of my office, but I don't have enough. And it's so you've got gender imbalance that exists as well, and how to attract and how to use that, where you want to have that balance for a whole range of reasons. And so you still have an issue with trying to get individuals in certain roles and getting the right balance. And that's not insurmountable. It's an interesting challenge to have with society as it exists, with that 35, 40-year-old peak at the moment, because they're spending and they're wanting and they want to consume and they want to add value and they want to learn, they want to study, they want to grow, they've got the young families, and it's an interesting society, and there's a lot of opportunities and everyone's chasing that. And that's the biggest barrier, is that you're never going to be first to do something in Vietnam. Vietnam is not an outpost that is waiting for someone to say, I'll give it a go. They're already there. It's how do you take most advantage of what you can take advantage of and do something different or something better, but you're not going to be first.
So on that note, what level of tech innovation is there in the major cities? Because everyone's looking for a blue ocean. They're all looking for a space that is uncontested. They're all looking for, a new product that they can bring to market at volume at a lower price. Do you see a lot of that occurring in Vietnam? Yeah,
so Vietnam has been, Vietnam missed the voice, the Philippines, the India voice back office being a support center, because language, and in today, spoken English is not natural. Therefore, we missed that. What they did do was the back office tech. So the tech development, and so Australian banks, National Australia Bank has centralised. They've got 2,500 staff, I think, now here doing a whole lot of retail-facing tech development out of Vietnam. So the development skills here are significant. So from a tech development and an AI-driven, I think blockchain cryptocurrency, Vietnam's the third or fourth biggest user in the world, and that's not as a currency. It's not actually a currency. It is the propensity to accept and use technology and not being wary of technology. They embrace it. So you've got the development centers, you've got a lot of tech development happening here, a lot of back office development for global players. They set up Vietnam as the back office. With that comes society. So as I said before, you've got digital IDs now, where money-wise, I don't cash. I think I've used it recently. It's all tap to pay. It's all scanned. It's apps, your e-commerce, everything's done via apps. And that is just part of it. And the government is pushing that. They want that. They love that because they can roll out and do things with greater impact through technology than trying to do the traditional, the local cadre, the local ward office who's supposed to look after the area has to go around, knock on doors and share information. And that, it's a very old school communist style, and that has got so many flaws, and it served its purpose. But they don't want that. They want this modernized approach to dealing with society to encourage growth. And it is about protection for growth. And so the opportunities to be part of that is if you can integrate a technology service platform opportunity that works somewhere else. Vietnam is very open to it. It doesn't mean you're the first mover. It doesn't mean that you've got a solution that it needs. But by all means, it's open to it. You can bring something to the market. So I said, Vietnam, TikTok, huge. YouTube, it's, the platforms that you see, Vietnam is in them, and it's in deeper than most. It's very much as I said earlier, the little stands, little food stands, the old lady pushes around. She's got a QR code with a bank to scan it, pay the bank. I don't want your cash. That there's acceptance and opportunity that comes with a society that has adopted technology as the norm is significant. So I overhype it in some ways that, opportunities are there, but also have to restrain that you're not going to be the first. Very smart population. Someone's probably thought about it. So how is yours different, and how will you make an impact that others haven't? And so it's got to be very careful, to be very nuanced of how you can do that, but you can. Yeah.
So from the government's point of view, what are they doing to attract investment, and who do they want? I mean, they've obviously put out a mandate or a charter or a document or a 2050 strategic plan that says this is where we want to develop. So these are the supports. So they are looking for health, education, financial services. What are they looking for? What are they asking for help with in regard to help them meet their 2050 goals?
There's a few different elements to that. So there's 2050 goals, and there's general goals of where Vietnam wants to be a middle income and a high income country, and there's various goals to get there. And it's been a decentralized authority, national rules and then provincial application. And the provinces used to fight with each other for their own needs to meet that, and so infrastructure particularly. Now, interestingly, about 3 weeks ago, the Politburo, so basically the think tank for the government, that sits at the top of everything, come out and released what's called Resolution 68, which was a 10-page document that just says, okay, the next part of growth in Vietnam is going to be the private sector. The state-owned enterprises, which is about 25% of the economy, have got certain levels. The foreign investors, we support them. The private sector, and this doesn't exclude foreign investors, but this private, we need to make sure that we're providing adequate debt funding and options. We've got to make sure that we're not restricting, that we provide benefits, that there's tax benefits required to encourage startups and new ventures and new going through. And large companies with the capital, those that had state backing, you've got to reinvest in training and also supporting small businesses as supply chain, so that we're not dependent as a country in Vietnam on foreign invested supply chains completely, where that was a problem before, where Samsung factory made all the phones, but all the componentries were still foreign invested supply chain. So they're trying to redress and force that through trying to make that part of the culture of that's what we want. Within that, reducing bureaucracy, getting rid of 30% to 40% of all unnecessary procedures and processes to simplify things. If something's not law, an authority can't make an interpretation and an inference from that that's actually not written in law. So before, where some authority would say, actually, we interpret, we think you should need this. If the law doesn't say it, that got to be removed. So trying to make things work better, trying to focus on the private enterprises as the next growth, because that's where the most of the employment is, even though maybe not the profits, and to make society work better. And from foreign investors, that means opportunities. They're not going to be constrained to come in. They're removing the roadblocks to some of the sectors. Now, you've still got restrictions. So education is a large capital requirement for education, and that's part of a policy decision to protect educators. So you can't, small operators don't just come in and set up and sort of rogue operators. Larger capital properties, students, but you can do it. Healthcare, again, the requirements to make sure that they're not rogue operators, but the foreign invested schools and healthcare are the ones driving change. So they're always supporting in nearly all sectors foreign investors, and they're trying to encourage that what stops growth is not going to hamper growth through the next 10, 15 years, to make sure that the economy's supporting that growth. And when I come back to your question specifically about services as a whole is, as you get a more developed economy, you move from a manufacturing to a services consumption. As you've got in wealth, so in the bigger cities, you've got the GDP, the average income per capita is like $5,000 a year. But if you take out that, you're looking at people earning $5,000 a month, $3,000 a month, US dollars. So you're looking at incomes that aren't that different to what the average person earns in a lot of developed countries in that concentrated inner area. Well, their needs are similar to what is in a developed country as far as services and demands and how they spend. So this purely manufacturing driven moving to a services consumption provides all those opportunities. What does the government want from that? They want to make sure this is a developed society. So there's infrastructure across the board, when that is a big constraint to make sure the infrastructure meets the growth, and that the services being provided aren't for those very critical areas. Health and education aren't being provided by fly-by-night operators. They're done with regulatory supervision and done properly at a scale. But within those constraints, they want everything else. So foreign banks, foreign insurance companies, accounting, legal, professional services, all of those are part of what the infrastructure wants and accepted by authorities and accepted by society. So as a foreigner here, I'm respected because I'm adding value. I'm not a foreigner coming in to rape and pillage and take away from the country. They see that foreign investors are here to add to the country. And that's a mindset that's been set for many years by the government in their approach to how they want the country to develop.
Yes. So Matthew, it would be quite timely for us to talk about tariffs, I think.
We have to? Okay, no, let's talk tariffs.
Yes, let's talk about tariffs just for a moment. Now, the world over the last little while has, been put into a state of shock because of, the changes that have come out of the American administration. Can you tell me how that's landed with Vietnam, how it's responding, and what is the attitude of local business?
Yeah, lots of different elements of that question, because firstly, there was shock at the start. And because if you look, Vietnam has a huge trade surplus with the US. Why? Because a lot of the US companies use Vietnam as a manufacturing, and this, Nike and Adidas and not America, but Apple, etc. Vietnam's worked well. They've made money because they've invested in Vietnam, and Vietnam allowed that because that was great. And if you look on a per capita using GDP per person, the average American spends less percentage of the money on a Vietnamese made product than a Vietnamese makes on a US product, because of income levels, and you can't rationalize that. And you can't rationalize anything in these decisions, because what's happening out of the US administration is not rational. It's political, it's not rational, and therefore you can't apply logic to solutions and impacts, etc. So after the first few days trying to understand, and then the tariff pause definitely gave Vietnam a sort of relief of where it sits. And a lot of the China fight plays to Vietnam in that you can't have all your enemies in Asia. You need some friends. So Vietnam manufacturers will just do what we can for now and see what happens. So that's the general feel, is we just do what we can. That first 10 days was rough, but we do what we can.
Yeah.
So you're still seeing the last data, exports are up, foreign investments up. So it's working. There's risks and there's uncertainty, but you can't change that. The Vietnamese government is very astute. They've got more free trade agreements. They've got more agreements. They had visits in a 12-month period from the president of China, the president of USA, and the president of Russia. No other country has that. So they really strategically don't take sides. This Switzerland approach where everyone's friends, no one's enemy, the bamboo diplomacy from that, it gives the opportunity for Vietnam to negotiate one-on-one with the US. Now, given today's court case, whether that's necessary or not, we'll give it time, but they will negotiate one-on-one. But they still would negotiate with China to make sure that they keep that, because China on a two-way trade is actually more than the USA. Now, that's supply chain driven. That's world supply chain comes from China. But making sure that you're not cutting off your nose to spite your face to ensure that you've got strategic alliances. There was the ASEAN conference that finished up 2 days ago, and this statement is about we're working ASEAN's one. We're not going to do anything that disrupts others. Vietnam will play all those games, and Vietnam will work to the EU. The French president was here 2 days ago for a state visit, and deals were done. And so that pragmatic approach, we're not throwing all eggs in one basket, but we're going to very much negotiate and try to do something that may look like a loss of face in some ways by cozying up, and yes, the administration will give you what you want. But if that benefits the country and keeps the wheels churning and accelerates growth because Vietnam gets a better position than its neighbours, that's what it's trying to do. So it's really interesting of what's happening. Now, society sees that. Society understands that. So your level of commentary from those not in Vietnam about, oh, it's dangerous, everyone's worried, versus you in Vietnam where that's not quite the perception that the average person has, is interesting, because understanding the way the government reacts and liaises with the world as a whole, and knows that it's got to make concessions, but it's for the big greater good, but to be friends with everyone and have no enemies. The bamboo diplomacy has worked and will continue to work. Not to say that the tariffs can't cause trouble. They can cause great economic trouble, but by themselves, they're not the only thing working in Vietnam, and Vietnam is working using that just one piece in the greater puzzle that it needs to focus on.
So I think what we just have to accept that tariffs are here, we need to adjust to them, and we need to just get on with life, really, do our best to work around them.
That's just what happened. That's correct. Yeah. I think most countries are taking that approach, to be honest. It's just what it is.
I think it's a really healthy attitude. Good on you, Vietnam. So you, in your role as a market entry, facilitator, you must have seen a lot of failures and successes as well over the years. What is your advice to people about how is the best way to launch into Asia? Well, I've been having this conversation for 30 years, and the same advice is given always, which is, make sure you have a presence on the ground, come as frequently as you can, build those relationships, use distributors, use partners. I mean, it's the same advice over 30 years. Now, you've been there 20 years in Vietnam. What has worked for people? What of the successes? Just a couple of key nuggets, because otherwise it's always the same messaging, and that messaging doesn't just apply to Vietnam. It's any Western country trying to get into Southeast Asia. But also there will be, other people that might be listening from other countries in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia or Singapore, who want to come to Vietnam. What is it that's going to be easier for them, given the successes and failures that you've observed over all these years?
And you're on the ground, find people, and all those things work. And that you're exactly right. But okay, so I'd say a few of those things that are more Vietnam specific. One of them is particularly those coming from Western countries, common law countries, it be in Singapore, Australia, US, UK, the expectation of logic and rational decision making in processes. And it just doesn't work. Everything is a process. You can't assume something. If there's 7 steps to get your company set up, and step 4 requires certain documents, you can't just say, well, I'll do something else, I'll get alternatives, we'll work around that. No, you need those documents. It's a process. And the key is, whenever you're going to do something, instead of making a logical assumption about what's going to happen, ask the questions and find out what the steps and processes and what's required. And if you have a problem with step 3, deal with that problem at the start. because some people get halfway through and get stuck and can't fix it because they shouldn't have started is, amazing watching that. And so understanding that it's a process-driven society, not a logic-driven, and applying logic may actually cause you more trouble when it comes to society. Not your business logic and commercial acumen, etc. is there, but don't fight process and make sure you ask what the processes are. And that goes from a commercial arrangement, that goes to a government setup, but just it's process-driven. Logic is your enemy sometimes. And as hard as that is to accept, that's just a fact. Second one is people, and I'm contrarian to others saying, I need a good joint venture partner, find a right partner. I disagree. You need commercial partners, those people who you can, distributors and those who know certain things. But doing a joint venture that ties your success to someone else where they may diverge. Most of those formal joint ventures diverge and they don't work. Some do. But by having your arrangement where you can rely upon commercial partners, but you're not beholden to them and their vision as that changes. Because the reason you come into market and the reason they want you changes regularly. What you want to get out of it and how you mature in market, all of a sudden your partner starts going a different direction because they're trying to expand abroad and they leave you in the lurch. But if you're dependent upon them, so that breaks apart. So that's contrarian to many that say you need a good joint venture partner. I disagree, and you need good commercial partners. And Pamela, you said that earlier on. You want your distributors, etc. You want to align yourself, but not be beholden to. And the last one is this reliance on individuals. We often see it that I've got in Vietnam, you need a chief accountant, like a company secretary, tax person, your internal sign-off. I've got a great chief accountant. They do everything for me. I trust them. In Vietnam, trust is dangerous. It's important, but dangerous. Reliant on the individuals, not having oversight, not using third parties to review and check, and not having that oversight and relying because you don't know the market. You rely on people, not being too reliant on individuals. Make sure your process gives you that ability to make sure that things are what they seem, that you have that comfort, you have the ability to step back and your business works, because in the early days, if you make mistakes on licenses, you make mistakes on filings, they can have a huge impact later on when you are successful and you're getting significant fines or restrictions from authorities because of your historical compliance doesn't allow you to do what you want to do. So yeah, over-reliance on individuals and trusting too much not for the wrong reasons, just that's what happens in a market. We need to trust someone, but that is a downfall for many as well. So yeah, my three things: logic versus process, joint ventures and formal relationships with a local party may be detrimental in the long run, and reliance on individuals and without third parties can be dangerous.
Good. Okay, last point. As we highlighted at the start, you were formerly the president of the Australian Chamber in Vietnam. And a board member thereafter. So in your experience with chambers, I understand that the AusCham does a really terrific job up there, and other chambers, obviously, New Zealand, America, they're all there. But I remember in an earlier interview on Thrive 2030 was with Lyndall Hugo, who set up Orla in the Mekong Valley, and from Australia. That manufacturing business, and it was a wonderful story, which is on my blog. But I remember her saying to me at the time that she gave a lot of credit to the chamber in supporting her to get underway. She said, as a startup in the Mekong Delta from Australia with not much money, trying to get things off the ground, she said, the relationships and the advice from the chamber was really helpful. All chambers, I guess. So would you say that that's still a good place for people to go to get advice and support?
There's no one perfect answer. So what I tell people is, yes, use the chambers, AusCham, AmCham, BritCham, New Zealand, and because the comfort of going to people that understand who you are and what you do is really important. Those who have been here or those who are going through similar issues to what you're facing in a foreign country, it's really important. So that comfort element that comes from the business chamber aligned to who you are. Yeah, some of the chambers are better than others for certain sectors and certain knowledge. but you tend to fall back to your countries because that gives you that comfort. Use that. Use the networks that come out of that. Sometimes some of the platforms, like at the moment, the Australian government, Austrade and the landing pads and that, they're putting a lot of focus in Vietnam, and there's programs and there's grants, and they might be the best path because they may give you opening doors to certain groups and certain opportunities you may not have otherwise. But also the informal, it's firms like us coming through, and there's also other groups that do a lot of business and trade tours. We don't do that, but we're happy to meet with people, and then you actually introduce them to others. So it's the informal network as much as the formal. All of those things work, and not one is better than the other. And what we say is use them all and find the path that makes you work. What does come from that is where is the commonality here is that that the foreign business sector is vibrant to support foreign businesses, and there's always someone that has done something similar or been in a similar situation or can give the advice and hold hands or tell you don't do that. More importantly, in many cases, that network's there and it's supportive. It is not a distant it's not hard to come across that. And that might be an OzTam networking event. It might be a technical update. It might be knowing someone who knows someone who you go drink after you've met them at one of those events that actually gives you that answer, that path, that solution. That's there. So the foreign infrastructure, the people's infrastructure definitely works. And once you've got past the cultural, you're adapting to your own culture, your own country, reaching out to those from other countries, because it's the foreign sector as a whole. So your French comrades and your German and your Canadians are just as much useful as your Australian and New Zealand sort of cohort when it comes to supporting foreign sector, because you all face the same issues and the same fact that you're not local, you don't know the same things that locals do, but you've got an opportunity. So it goes very broad, and use all of them, because every path to market is subtly different based upon individuals and products and needs and backgrounds, etc.
Yeah, good advice. Well, Matthew, that's been a fantastic conversation. Lots of insight there into how things in Vietnam are a little different from a lot of other Southeast Asian nations. And it's really helpful to have some of those precious little nuggets from someone of 20 years experience in that market. I ask everyone on Thrive 2030 one final question, which is because, as chief executives and chairmen of businesses in the region, you've got oversight of what's going on in the region, and also you think about what's going on in the world, because we're all being impacted by what's happening in the world every day. So my last question to everyone is, if you were CEO of the world at some point in the future, what would be on your list to address in the top 100 days?
It's interesting that the answer would have been quite different 3 months ago. At the moment, it is trade. Trying to back to a singular global trade instead of this unilateral process that predominantly the US has pushed us in, but this moving to unilateral does not help anyone. It doesn't help countries. It doesn't help individuals. The prices, the impact on certainty for a farmer growing a crop that's sold to one market that may be tariffed out, and all of a sudden they can't grow and their cost goes up and they can't spend, and the uncertainty and what that does for the ability to plan, but also the nations and the world. And I'm talking developed nations, accessibility and availability of products at a price is impacted right now. So moving back to a rules-based global order is a foundation for global certainty, and I think everyone is better off for that. And I didn't 3 months ago, it wouldn't have been on the top of my head to need to deal with it, because we had a rules-based order. Did it work well? Possibly not, and maybe it needs a breaking point to refresh and reset that. But I think resetting that is an important thing for all countries and all people for the long term. And I think right now we're not in a position that's necessarily good for a lot of people.
Yeah, good answer. Yeah, and you're quite right. 3 months ago, the world was a completely different place. And, everyone is having to rethink it, but I think Vietnam's approach is fresh and sensible. And it's a really great example, for people to take from. Thank you so much once again. It's been terrific to have you on Thrive 2030. Lovely to have your insights, and I'm sure people would have got a lot of great ideas out of this and will reach out to you. So all the best at Alitium in Vietnam, and we hope to see you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Matthew.
Bye.